Hello again, friends. Good morning, and welcome to another edition of Jim Cornette's Drive-Thru, a happy and fun, action-packed edition of Jim Cornette's Drive-Thru. I am your host, the great Brian Last, and it's my pleasure to be with you once again as we go over your questions sent in many times to Cornette, to CornyDriveThru at gmail.com or on Twitter using the hashtag CornyDriveThru. Without any further ado, the man who will be answering your queries here today, Mr. Jim Cornette.
I don't even know where to begin. You know, it's good because normally I start this program by saying, well, this happened and the other thing happened and the other thing happened. But today I've transformed myself. I've got up early this morning and I've opened this book on Zen Buddhism, and I've contemplated and I've meditated and mediated and fornicated, and I am calm and peaceful and relaxed. I'm an open vessel ready to take in the queries of from the cult of Cornette and then disseminate clouds of information upon you. May they rain down like lotus blossoms upon you, my children. And meanwhile, Brian, you before we went on the air, you beat up a chair. You started putting the boots to a chair. You're screaming about you have relatives whom you despise.
That's not what I said. I said my sister is here visiting, and I just need a little time away for a little bit. I didn't say it despise. I love my sister.
And you have all these problems, and you're so overwrought and tense. And you need to calm down, Brian. But it's you know, because I was like that last week. I was like that over this past week because this past week I worked my fingers to the bone filling these orders at JimCornette.com at the Cornette's Collectibles Holiday Sale. And you know what I got, Brian? Bony fingers.
Bony fingers.
I got bony fingers, but still the orders are going out to the cult of Cornette out there at the holiday sale, and it has given me inner peace. You should try it.
I'm sorry, what has given you inner peace? Packaging items and sending
items and sending items out and servicing people and fulfilling people's needs and being a benefit to the community. Because do you realize how many Christmas packages, how many Christmas gifts that are being crossed off because of this sale? For people all over the world who have a wrestling fan in the family, have a wrestling fan in their social circle, are a wrestling fan themselves, and they're so lonely because nobody else is going to give them a present, so they buy their own, whatever it may be. I'm crossing a lot of items off those lists. I'm like a real life Santa Claus this Christmas. Big, and not only that, but it's affordable too. As we've talked about, the $9 classic wrestling DVD sale. I don't understand how I'm even able to stay in business by doing this. Double the Rumble is flying off the shelves, folks. It may not last through the holidays. I'm just saying we don't know about these things. It may be sold out forever. But anyway, perfect stocking stuffers, the Wrestling Gold set, the Cult of Cornette membership certificates, the brand new Outlaw Mud Show t-shirt, which is now going to be wonderful for the holiday parties. And also the action figures, the books, the burger towels I thought I'd stocked up for the holidays, but then these are custom made items. So if you want burger towels, folks, I'd say in the next week or so, you better get it in. I may not be able to restock in time. You know, much of these items, Brian, as you know, are custom made.
Yes.
So
hand-sewn in the basement of Castle Cornette.
Yes, using only the finest unborn virgin goat's hair. And but anyway, gifts for the fan in your life. Go to JimCornette.com. You can spend a little money and get a lot of shit. And make it easier on yourself for that, because you can't just go shopping for a wrestling fan on just, Amazon or fucking, Lowe's.com and get them a power drill or something. You have to go to a special site like this. I specialize in people who love pro wrestling.
Aren't you worried though about what could happen?
Well, what are you saying? What are you threatening me with?
Well, I mean, let's talk about what you're doing here. You're offering all these items that are easy to stuck into a stocking. I can't see. Stuck into a stocking. And that stocking at that point will have great weight to it.
A stocking. You can stuff them easily into a stocking, but go on.
At that point, the stocking would have great weight to it. and boom, you never know. Some little kid could be walking by, bangs them in the head. There's a lawsuit.
Oh, if it's hung by the chimney with care, and the weight of these precious items that I sell for pennies, for a mere pittance on my website, jimcornette.com, just click on collectibles. The weight of these items causes the stocking to come loose from its fixings by the chimney with apparently not enough care, and that may be a point in court, and falls and strikes the little crumb snatcher on the head, causing brain damage, bodily injury, loss of consortium with their various family members, and then what?
Sorry.
What then?
I guess I thought you said something you didn't say.
Well, I don't know. I don't know what I said. I was making it up as I went along. I don't know. But at any rate, you're saying that then people would be forced to seek legal remedy is what you're trying to tell me.
Forced. Yes, exactly.
Forced to seek legal remedy, and where better to go to seek legal remedy for any occasion, for all occasions, for anybody that's basically injured you, impaired your life, or fucked you around in any way, shape, or form due to negligence or outright perspicacity. Stephen P. New and the New Law Office. It's newlawoffice.com, 888-692-8084. Because if he'll take on these big corporations like BP and Exxon and Amazon and Universal Studios and General Motors and get millions of dollars in judgments against big companies that fucked over the little guy, then he can help you out. As we've talked about, that Stephen is not only a sponsor of the program here, but a real American who fights for the rights of every man. I'm sure he would have even fought for the rights of Terry Bollea if it had come down to it.
But what about the rights of Hulk Hogan?
Well, he's a fictitious character, so I heard. It came out in court. But anyway, Stephen P. New is one of us. He's a wrestling fan. He's a man on the right side of the law. And if you need to bring the hammer of justice down on someone, one of these big corporations or big companies that likes to fucking use the little guy for trash, garbage, crumpled tissue on the peep show booth floor of life, then Stephen P. New is the man for you. If you need to sue, call Stephen P. New, because new is for you. And I'd rather be new than old any day.
And what's the number they can call if they want to call it?
I've just said it just moments ago. You ought to have it memorized by now. 888-692-8084, newlawoffice.com.
Well, there we go. And I think everyone should contact Steve.
Hey, Steve, now you can't even give him any goddamn... You just call Michael Avenatti Mike?
What do you think about what's going on with Avenatti, real quick, here at the top of the show?
Well, I'm okay. They said he was arrested for domestic violence, but his wife says that she wasn't a part of it. So it ought to be real easy to trace who then has accused him of domestic violence. He says he's completely innocent. He's never struck a woman before, and I've not heard anything about it since he was arrested. What are the details of this case? Was he just punching some lady out on the street somewhere, or how can we get to the bottom of this?
Well, there are some theories, and I think just putting it out there right now, by the time we do the experience, there'll be many other theories tweeted to us over and over and over again. Because there's still a lot of information I don't know, but I just want to know what your initial thoughts were. But let's get to wrestling, Jim.
Well, wait a minute. You're not going to give me any information whatsoever about
I was hoping you were going to give me the information.
Well, no, I literally saw that, and he says, no, this is fictitious and never happened. And where is the other person saying, no, you motherfucker? Where are the details? How can this have happened? And nobody says anything about it.
I don't even know who the other person is, and the only theory I've heard, and I've seen this out there several times, is that they're blaming, or at least Avenatti's people are saying that the person behind this is the same guy who tried to frame Robert Mueller, saying that he had all these extramarital affairs.
Well, there you go.
So we'll see what happens, but let's get some of the listeners' questions here on the show. Jim, this first one was sent in to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from Aaron Tolis. I hope I'm pronouncing your last name correctly, Aaron. In Bowling Green, Ohio. What do you think would have happened if Ted DiBiase had signed with Crockett in 1987 instead of Vince? Do you think he would have been more or less successful? Worked as a face or as a heel? Possibly even a member of the Horsemen? Do you think he would have had a run with the world title?
Almost all of those things, except be more successful. Because if Ted had started in what was the summer of 87-ish, Crockett was going to sell 15, 16 months later, and then everything went to shit. But
hold on, though. But if he had gone there summer of 87, and let's say they said, okay, Vince wants him, we really want him, would they still have been in a position to give him a giant guaranteed contract to get him in there, even though they would have realized in early 88 they couldn't pay any of these contracts?
Well, the thing is, Vince didn't give him a giant guaranteed contract either. I think it came down to Ted believing Vince when he said, hey, I've got a great gimmick for you, blah, blah, blah. But there was no guarantees from the WWF in those days. Crockett was giving out contracts that at the time were better than Watts's. He wouldn't have started giving the big contracts out that he didn't have to pay for until the spring of 88. So the decision would have already been made. Ted would have had fantastic matches with with Flair, with all those guys. He may have even worked into the Horsemen some kind of way, or certainly been in one of the top baby faces opposing the Horsemen. The matches would have been incredible. He would have definitely won the belt at some point, whether it was before or after Crockett sold to TBS. All of those things would have happened, but he wouldn't have made nearly as much money because fucking Vince made him a superstar and made him a ton of money. And as I mentioned, Crockett sold to TBS, and then everything went to shit from there for years.
Physically, he probably wouldn't have lasted as long either, because you have to think that if he had signed a deal with Crockett, he probably would have remained with All Japan as well.
Probably, and also he would have been working a lot. I don't want to say working a lot harder. Ted always worked hard in his matches and always had good matches, especially by WWF standards. But he would have been having matches in the NWA that were harder on his body on a more regular basis, especially at that time period, than he did in the WWF. Let's put it that way. And by the way, you know what really grinds my gears? When we've answered a question recently on the program and somebody innocently sends it in again, and we just don't ask that question, and then they get mad because they think we're ignoring them personally, and they send that question every day. That really grinds my gears. What about you, Brian?
I would assume that would be rather annoying, but let's get another question here, Jim. This one was sent to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from Adam Lawrence, or maybe it's Lawrence. Adam Lawrence, actually, I guess.
Mark Lawrence.
It's spelled the same way, I believe. After watching some videos on YouTube, I noticed when a story was being told, sometimes Jim or a guest like Hacksaw would put a finger on the side of their nose. What exactly does that gesture mean?
What
the gesture on the side of the nose?
Well, I would need the context of the story, because side of the nose also is under the eye, because if you put the finger under the eye, then yeah. Sure. Like, he said he wasn't cheating on her. Or if it's by the side of the nose, I don't know. It could be, one of those 80s references. I don't know. The middle finger might be a way to slip somebody the fucking finger. I'd have to know the context of the story and exactly what finger it was and which direction the finger was being placed and etc.
All right, so send in your question again with more detail, and we'll see what we can do. Next question, Jim.
Tell it more detail on where you want your finger.
Our next question, Jim, was sent in to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from John Fell in Baltimore. I was wondering.
You were waiting for me to make
you would say something about
obnoxious reference about his name, but now we can't, because now I feel bad for browbeating John sometimes in public when he's been so nice to us.
I was wondering, who do you think Vince McMahon Sr. could have used in place of Bruno Sammartino if he had decided not to take back the WWF Championship in 1973?
Oh, so who, instead of getting Bruno to take the belt back, oh my God. Well, there were people that he could have, but who would he? It was a different story, because Vince Sr. used to pull his talent from a specific group that he liked, right? And not just go shopping all across the country.
Yeah. obviously when they were going to go to Pedro, the thought had been there about possibly going to Mario Milano, and they went with Pedro. They didn't do Mario Milano, but this, I don't think they would have gone to him at this period of time a few years later.
Well, no, and besides that, do you think that was Bruno wanting a paisan was it Vince Sr.? Because I remember the story, but I don't remember the origination. Was it Vince Sr. wanting another ethnic Italian, or was it Bruno putting a good word in for Mario Milano? Because I cannot see Mario Milano as the WWF champion, but that's just me.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Ivan Koloff wrote about it in his book, saying that he did at a TV taping, they did one of those things. I think they may have done it.
That's right. That's right.
He lost the match to Mario Milano while he was champion during that window. But they stopped the tape so that you didn't really see a title change or anything. So something was set up. I don't know what the whole story was though, but they thought about it.
Well, anyway, they went with Pedro because once again, another ethnic hero, and the Puerto Rican population, I assume, had pretty much exploded in the 70s in New York, to pass the Italian population, because Italians had been big in New York since they brought wrestling back. Primo Carnera and then Bruno, but also Rocca and Perez. But you had a combination of both. Anyway, that's a good question. Would he have gone for the All-American boy earlier? Because they did it with Jack Briscoe.
Well, he didn't have it set up, though. Remember, he went with the All-American boy after a year of planning, at least.
True. So I don't know, John. That's a very good question. Who would Vince Sr. I don't know that that's ever been asked before. Who would Vince Sr. have gone with if he couldn't have got Bruno to come back?
Would he have stayed with Pedro longer? Because obviously there's no candidate there that I could think of that would have been the person to elevate. It's not like you're going to put the title on Chief Jay Strongbow.
Yeah. And at the same point, Pedro was drawing in the Garden, as the story goes. He was not drawing as well as Bruno did across the entire territory from Boston to Pittsburgh or whatever. And the story used to go out that they were afraid of the heat. For, the Puerto Ricans were even more violent than the Italians. And if you fucked Pedro around, they were afraid of riots. And especially when Blackjack Mulligan got stabbed, not even stabbed, but cut, sliced, 200 and something stitches against Morales in Boston, that they said, well, we need to get this belt maybe, off of him because it's dangerous. But I think it's probably more a business decision. And that's when Bruno got the leverage to ask for a percentage and became the highest paid guy in the business those next 3 or 4 years.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's an interesting question, because the NWA style guys would not have worked in that environment, because they were all, for lack of a better term, they were the workers instead of the heroes. They could work circles around, a lot of guys that may have worked the Northeast, but it was completely different style in the ring and the promotional style. And I don't think any of the top NWA guys, the Briscoes or the Funks or the Races, would have worked in New York.
Makes you wonder if Bruno could have demanded more, actually.
He probably could have.
Yeah.
Especially when he drew $500,000 in Shea Stadium. I think he could have probably, if he'd have been Ernie Ladd, he would have left in a goddamn Rolls Royce.
Well, let's get another question here, Jim. This one was sent to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from Tim in Newark, New Jersey. With your recent recollection of the Challenger disaster promo, what is the one thing that young Jim Cornette said in a promo that wise, mature Jim Cornette wishes he could take back?
Oh, God. Well, we talked about, it was another question here recently about when Hawk pulled me over to the side after I said on TBS one day I was going to buy the Road Warriors a copy of the biography of Brian Bosworth, which was a thinly veiled steroid reference. So and he explained why they're going through airports and shit. People fuck with us. Except for just fucking up and or doing blasé promos, I don't know if I ever particularly said anything horrible on a promo that I would want to take back. It just might have been not my best promo.
At the time, in the moment, did you regret anything you said about Baby Doll?
On the air? No, absolutely not. Because that But yes, when the cops came in and arrested me in Spartanburg one night, it was a rib I wasn't aware of at the time, and I thought I was really going down. And I caught Baby Doll out of the corner of my eye giggling because she knew that it was a fucking setup. And I lashed out at her verbally in a very sharp way and called her a couple of things on my way, thinking I was going on my way out to the fucking squad car. And then I felt bad when I found out it was a rip. But I thought she was laughing at me going to the fucking big house, right? So anyway, I regrets. I've had a few, but then again, now I once again, back in those days, we just rattled shit like that off, and if it was distasteful or whatever, if we heard about it, there was that promo that we played a few weeks ago where I said all the things that I couldn't say in fucking Roanoke and Lynchburg because of the religious folks. But if we got to complain about it, it would stick out in our memory or in my memory. But there you go.
Well, let's move on with another question.
I'm not saying I never cut a promo that was bad or that sucked, but just that I regretted saying because of some reason.
What's the worst promo you ever cut?
Oh, okay. Here's one, and I swear to fucking God that we didn't get heat for this until like years later when people found it on fucking YouTube or whatever and put it out on the internet. I was cutting a promo in Smoky Mountain Wrestling. We were somewhere like in Clinch Cove, fucking Virginia at the gym. And I was cutting a promo and I called the people, oh, shut up, all you bunch of genetic defects. And they cut to a crowd shot. And there was a person there who was challenged, standing right there in the middle of about 3 or 4 other people. And I couldn't see the fucking monitor. The director was just cutting to the only crowd shot he had because the cameraman happened to be shooting the fucking crowd. It wasn't like we didn't post-produce it that way. And holy God, it looked bad when it was called to my attention.
There was an early episode of Smoky Mountain. It's so long ago, you did so much. I don't know if you would remember this. I have to think you would. Where they show several shots of a fan in the crowd. She kind of looks like It's Pat, the SNL character, and she's dancing all around and everything. Yes. Now, sometimes if we got an entertaining one like that, we'd go back to them on occasion. Well, that was my question. Were you in the truck? Were you saying, go to her again?
What? No, I was never in the truck because I was in the locker room, but I was in front. Our gorilla position was a fucking elementary school chair with a monitor, about a 9-inch monitor sitting on it, and the guy with the headset, so I could say, tell Alan fucking so-and-so or whatever. And because I was out there 3 segments of the show live anyway, so I never had time to go to the fucking truck, and I probably would have had a heart attack if I'd have gone out there to begin with. But no, the crew that was shooting the shows had plenty of experience shooting wrestling, whether it was when we had Spruce McRae's truck from Cross Creek Television Production. He used to do Ron Fuller's show in Birmingham in the 80s, or the guys from, our regular camera crew that got used to shooting the shows. So they would get crowd shots and other things and find entertaining people to show if Bouncing Beulah was there. Things like that.
Our next question, Jim, was sent in on Twitter using the hashtag CornyDriveThru from Jamie Hammer. Jim, you spent a lot of time at Vince McMahon's house in the 1990s. Did you ever see a picture of the Ultimate Warrior on a bear-skinned rug?
No, there's a picture of Vince, a very glorious painted portrait of Vince with jacked up arms and everything on the wall in one of the mini living or sitting rooms, but I never saw the picture of Warrior.
All right. Well, our next question, Jim, was sent in to CornyDriveThru.
Okay, I can see sometimes now why you might be in a bad mood when you run through the questions for the show here on the program, Brian.
Well, there are a lot of rumors about this Ultimate Warrior picture, this alleged Ultimate Warrior picture of him.
I've never heard anything like on a bearskin rug.
Some sort of private McMahon photo shoot in the nude.
No.
Well, our next question, Jim, was sent in to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from Matt. This is a good question. I think you'll like this. I just started reading Tim Hornbaker's new book, and I just came across an interesting tidbit, and I can't help but wonder if Jim might know more about the MWA, which was promoted by Al Haft several decades ago in and around Columbus, Ohio. I am always interested in hearing about the history of pro wrestling, especially in my home state. I know I can Google it, but I'd rather hear Jim talk about it.
Well, yeah, Columbus was huge. Al Haft had promoted it, since the 30s, or some ridiculous amount of time, but he was revolutionary in that he had Haft's half acre, right? He had a piece of property that he built his own arena to have his shows in during one period. But Columbus was also a huge booking office because Columbus, Ohio in those days, and they pre-interstate, was like a hub that you could get if you were driving, you could get to the Northeast, you could get to the Midwest, you could get to the South, you could get to St. Louis in equal distant time. And Buddy Rogers worked out of there for quite a while. And a lot of the crew that he used to take around when he was figured in as a booker or as a star in a territory, the Billy Darnells of the world, and et cetera. And a lot of Ray Stevens, got started in that territory because he was from West Virginia. So, yeah, Al Haft, and of course, he's Bobby Fulton's favorite promoter. We can't forget to mention that. But so the Columbus booking office and the Ohio territory in general was huge in the 50s and 60s because of that. And then I've read on the internet somewhere the whole story of Al Haft, but I think he ran into tax troubles and issues later in his promotion and closed up. And then obviously, Ohio became a part of the Sheik's territory after all of that. But yeah, in the 50s, Columbus, Ohio was one of the rocking places in wrestling.
Our next question, Jim, was sent in to was sent in on Twitter to the hashtag CornyDriveThru from Gettysburg7. Why was Arnold Skaaland the manager of Bruno and Backlund? Did they need a mouthpiece? Because they were over and didn't need one. It always seemed to me he was just there because they had to pay him or something.
Well, no, remember we answered a question or talked about managers either on a drive-through or experience here lately where somebody had said, well, I don't understand why. Had written in an email saying, well, I love watch Bobby Heenan at ringside, but if it was real, what the fuck? And we talked about how originally the concept of managers was the same as a trainer in boxing or a corner man in the UFC or whatever. You always had a corner man, especially when you're a big deal and you're going into a fight. Well, Arnold Skaaland had a unique relationship with the office. He had been a wrestler he may have started in the 30s. I think he probably did. But he was a big name, a good solid name in the Northeast for years that had gotten involved in the office and ran towns. I remember when I started working for him, he ran White Plains, New York, which is one of these the White Plains Civic Center is one of those old buildings in the Northeast. It had that classic atmosphere and the stage and then the ring, that blah, blah, blah. But him running the town consisted at that point of him checking up at the box office. So he'd sit in the locker room with the boys, have his briefcase there, smoke cigars and play cards until it was time to go check up. And then he'd do that and he'd come back and resume. And that was running White Plains at that point. But he had been figured into the office there for so many years. And he had performed vital functions and probably did have a piece of ownership of, I don't remember whether he may have had a small piece of.
Yeah, he was one of the owners when Vince Jr. bought everyone out.
Okay, so he had a small piece of Capital Sports before Vince bought his dad out. And once again, if he came back, we've talked about this before, if he came back from the goddamn box office with $15,000 or $20,000 in cash in that fucking briefcase, even when he was 75 years old, nobody was going to fuck with Arnold Skaaland, and nobody was getting that fucking money. So he was just one of those valuable guys. He was figured in the and he was tight with Gorilla Monsoon when Monsoon was an owner. And so anyway, to the question, when the heels all had managers, a lot of times they used, and this was a way to get sympathy also on Bruno or Pedro or Backlund or whoever the fuck that they had Arnold work with, by doing something to him every so often physically. But a lot of times he did the same thing that the WWF managers all did. They made TV and made the promos, and then they went to the Garden and were introduced and then usually left and went back to the locker room. We've talked about that the style was not to heavily involve the managers back in those days. So, Skaaland was there to throw the towel in for Backlund with the Iron Sheik, right? Just as a way to get the belt off, and here we go. So he didn't go to every town with him every night. He didn't even do every TV interview with him. It's just when they needed him and they acknowledged that he was like their manager and, was responsible for their contracts at some point. It wasn't like they were married like Heenan and Bockwinkel. Did I explain that as well as can be explained when managers back in those days, the way they handled them in the WWF made no sense?
I think so. You explained that well. I did want to ask you, though, you talked about it a while back about Eddie Marlin and here again about Arnold Skaaland, but in Mid-South, in Mid-Atlantic, or I should say Crockett by the time you were there, World Class, who were some of the other bagmen? Who were some of the other people who they trusted with the money?
Well, in Mid-South, there were different promoters like the Curtis family, Jack Curtis and George Culkin and those guys promoted Mississippi. And obviously Paul Bosch had Houston, but the office towns were in Oklahoma. So Scott Munns from the Mid-South office would handle that. But Grizzly Smith was the guy. If it was a spot, because he went to everything. And if it was a spot show, I'm sure he was carrying a lot of fucking money, especially down at the Louisiana end. I remember one time we, honest to God, ran a spot show in Bogalusa, Louisiana at the high school football field at a $35,000 house. So it was fucking, it was like
1984.
In 1984. Yeah, there was like 4,500 people there or whatever the fuck. So there was a lot of money changing hands in some shady places down there. But Grizzly Smith was an agent before they used the term. He went to every single town. He never had a day off, and he never flew because he had a bad flight going to Puerto Rico one time when he was still wrestling, and the landing gear wouldn't come down, and they had to spray the runway and all that shit. And he told me, he said, I promised myself if I got out of that fucking plane, I was never getting back in another fucking plane. And that was in whatever the 70s. As of 1984, he hadn't done it. And I don't know that he maybe later on in later years when he worked for WCW. But anyway, Grizzly Smith was in that fucking car of his every day at all those towns, never a day off. Usually had one of the underneath guys, Bruce Brickhouse Brown at one point, somebody driving him so that he could sleep some. But he was the first one there because he checked everybody in. If you were more than 15 minutes late, Grizzly knew and you got fined. He watched every fucking match. If something kabuki-ish went on where you were jacking off or not taking things seriously or doing shit you weren't supposed to do or getting heat on the promotion, Watts knew you got fined. He was the last one to leave. If you got caught doing anything in the parking lot, he knew about it. And he was supernatural. He knew everything that went on in the locker room with everybody and reported to Watts so that he could take any appropriate action and just evaluated guys' attitudes. And I don't know how he kept that schedule up. I swear to God, I don't remember him ever being gone or ever taking a day off. So it was Grizzly there. In the Carolinas, Johnny Weaver, Sandy Scott, Elliot Murnick, they promoted the individual, like the Elliot Murnick and Carl Murnick promoted Raleigh, but also, up in Richmond and Norfolk and that area, whereas Sandy Scott had like Roanoke and spot shows in the middle part of Virginia. But Johnny Weaver for quite some time ran Greenville, South Carolina, and Spartanburg, and the TV tapings we do in South Carolina. And so there was a lot more than one guy, because nobody could have made that schedule in the Carolinas, especially when they were running a lot of times 2 towns a night. So you couldn't be everywhere. But that was guys like Johnny Weaver and Eddie Marlin and Grizzly Smith that did that for so long in those big territories over so many years, probably traveled 5 million miles in cars easy. Easy.
I think about how much money passed through their hands.
They should add green fingers, permanently stained.
What about Dallas?
Dallas, when I was there such a short time. I can't speak to the glory years when the whole territory was really booming. But most of the time they had somebody that promoted the spot shows, and then a David Manning, the referee, or usually David Manning or somebody like that would check, or Bronco Lubitsch would check up. And but it was a smaller, more self-contained thing.
How much responsibility did you see that David Manning had while you were there? And what did you think of him as a referee? Because he would exert himself. He would get involved in things.
Oh God, David did not want any fucking heat whatsoever. He was a babyface referee along the lines of Thomas Marlin. No, he didn't want any heat whatsoever. But no, I like David, and he had tons of responsibility, because that's another office that was kind of aging at the time. And I mean, loved Bronco Lubitsch. What a sweet, nice man, human being, whatever. But he was older, and Fritz was older. And so David got along with the kids and with their generation, and had some energy and some oomph to him, and would get out and do things and take things upon himself. So they relied on him a lot.
Our next question, Jim, was sent in on Twitter using the hashtag CornyDriveThru. It is from Tony Barker. I am watching NWA from February 1989. Tony Schiavone has left and was replaced by Magnum TA. What did you think about the job Magnum did as Jim Ross's co-host? Also, were Bob Caudle or Gordon Soley ever asked to join the broadcast given their Atlanta ties?
I think Gordon at that point was slowing down his schedule, and I don't know, and it's possible that he could have had words with the WCW or TBS over money or whatever. I don't know what caused him to part ways with him.
Well, no, I think this is before Gordon came back, actually.
Was it?
February of 89. He wasn't back.
Okay, yes. Okay, no, that's right. They brought him back later. With Tony leaving, actually, Jim Ross and Tony Schiavone together were two straight men and no partner in the comedy team. They're 2 play-by-play guys. So I can see why they replaced Tony with Magnum, because they wanted a more traditional play-by-play guy and color guy that you would see on football or sports or whatever. And Magnum, was still at that point a big deal in people's eyes, because it'd only been a couple of years since his wreck. And so he was certainly more than capable of filling the bill, and he was starting to get some experience with it. It was a right turn in his career to all of a sudden become an announcer, when he had never thought he was going to do that, or knew he was going to need to have to do that. So he was a little, at the beginning, but I thought he was getting better, and I can't remember actually what happened, why they quit using him either, because that's when they started. Shortly after that, it became fucking musical announcers, and that's all Herd was concerned about, was the announcers of the fucking program. And it was even going to pay me more to be an announcer than to be the manager of a top tag team. The announcers were getting paid more than the fucking wrestlers, while I'm going that far, in some cases. And it was fucking ridiculous. So you had, at one point, they tried everybody out on color. And then by the next year, when Ole got the book, he got some added. He took all the talent off color. He said, every heel is on a fucking TV show being witty and entertaining, so how can I get any heat on the heels? So he took me off and Teddy Long off and fucking everybody off. And then Herd would put them right back on. It just because, I'm paying these guys. I would have done the TV commentary for fucking. When I had done TV commentary before, it was for free, because I would get more heat as a manager, right? Nobody ever offered to give me a bonus when I did the commentary of the shows. And then all of a sudden, TBS is starting to pay guys more to announce than to fucking wrestle. It was ludicrous. But yeah, I don't know what the fuck. At that point, everybody was on and nobody was on. There was no I bet you there wasn't an announced team except maybe whoever did Saturday night that was left alone for more than 3 months on syndication, Sunday night, whatever the fuck, the Power Hour.
And in terms of Bob Caudle, he really didn't do that much in Atlanta. It was hard to get him away from the Carolinas, right?
Well, no, he did all the syndicated TV. They started doing fucking syndicated TV tapings everywhere. And he would go wherever he was needed. They just never put him on TBS for whatever fucking reason.
Can you imagine 1989, you have prime Jim Ross, Bob Caudle, who's still great, Gordon Soley, it's his last run, but it's nice to see him there, and then Lance Russell added to the mix. It's a dream team.
And they pretty much, except for JR, screwed them all up. Lance was relegated to doing the syndication where they would actually do stand-ups in front of a green screen of a crowd. It was just fucking, Lance was, to be Lance Russell, Lance had to be live. And Lance had to be the host of the show and and get the wrestlers over and conduct the interviews and do his thing. And he was the host of the show. And it was in a place like Memphis in the studio, and it was an hour or an hour and a half in your life. It happened as it happened. Lance Russell should not have been doing voiceovers of matches that other people then voice over for different programs, doing stand-ups in front of a green screen of a crowd, whether it's his co-host with him or just by himself, and fucking doing canned, taped shit on a syndicated television show. It was rotten. I don't mean Lance was rotten. I mean the shows were rotten.
What would you have done if you had been on the booking committee earlier when they were putting together that Center Stage show when they first moved there, and you have Jim Ross, who's already the host of the Saturday night show. Shivani's gone. David Crockett's gone, thankfully. But you have Bob Caudle's in the mix, obviously in the promotion, but he doesn't do the Saturday night show. But you have Lance Russell now. You have Gordon Soley. How would you have put together the announce team for the Saturday night show?
Well, here's the thing. The idea of having a play-by-play guy and a color guy, and the color guy being a wrestling personality of some description, is fine. But the way that they were doing their TV, the TBS Saturday night show obviously was most important. So that was, for all intents and purposes, kind of like what I talked about. When you went to Center Stage, they would pitch out of Center Stage to VTRs and et cetera, but the show came from there. But with these syndicated programs and the Sunday night's main event a lot of times, or Worldwide or NWA Pro or whatever, they were interchangeable matches that they just taped fucking 4 hours of these syndicated shows in an arena, and then had the announcers do stand-ups in front of the green screen, or sometimes you might see them at ringside or whatever, and they had different set of announced teams because, well, this will be the main event for syndication, and this will be the main event for TBS, and they were just packaged and produced. I would have put Lance Russell with a personality on NWA Pro or Worldwide. I'd have put Bob Caudle with a personality on the other one, and I'd have put Jim Ross with a personality on the TBS show, and made them all real, legitimate-looking fucking shows instead of just – and it was bad green screen, too, I remember, especially when they had Lance doing a show with Michael Hayes and Jimmy Garvin, trying to do goofy shit in front of the green screen to somehow pep the program up a little bit. It was dreary. But then the problem was that's all they would have ever done was shot television, which was another thing that was killing all the fucking towns.
Our next question, Jim, was sent in on Twitter using the hashtag CornyDriveThru from Rob Stovall. Dusty Rhodes gave number one Paul Jones a great deal of latitude with his promo time. Was Paul Jones the most unhinged promo amongst the Jim Crockett promotion stable of managers? And why such leniency from Dusty?
Well, Paul Jones was a big star as a wrestler in a lot of places, in Florida, in Georgia, and in the Carolinas. He had been figured in heavily for a long time. He was close with George Scott, which is why I think he probably ended up settling in the Carolinas. But he was a big deal as a wrestler, whether as a babyface or a heel. And as a babyface, he was kind of a bland promo. But as a heel, when he was a wrestler, he was kind of a cocky, number one, Paul, I'm number one. He was still not a fireball fucking promo, but he knew how to get some heat in the ring, and the standards were a little lower in those days. But then over the period of time, he had to transition to a manager because he had back issues and he was getting to that time period. And he was one of those guys that for his service and what he meant to the company, whether it was the George Harrises or the Klondike Bills or the whatever, Paul Jones is a guy that you just kind of was always going to be figured in with the Crockett's because he stayed through multiple bookers, right? So that's when he's figured in with the promotion. And the problem was Paul was not a real exciting fucking manager on his promos. And then, especially while I was there, I kind of saw him try to step up because he saw all these guys, whether it be me or it be JJ or the Horsemen or whatever, all these guys are doing these fucking promos now. It became promo central in the country, Crockett's office on Wednesdays. And the more he tried to be fired up, the more he came across kind of like he was losing his shit. And I think he went with it because he was not really crazy, but that's, he was trying to put oomph in the promos, and that's what came out. But basically when TBS bought the company, he was still there. Of course, he was one of the managers that, we had like 8 or 9 of us there at the time. And then George Scott came into book and made him an agent. And as soon as George Scott was fired, Paul disappeared and was never seen with WCW again.
Can I ask you a question? And I don't want to put you on the spot here, but I've heard this from 2 other people who were in that locker room. Was Paul Jones considered by some to be potentially a stooge for the Crockett office?
That evaluation had been made on a number of occasions, but here's the thing.
I try to say it delicately.
Well, yes, I can't verify that. I have no knowledge either way. However, everybody is going to think when a guy has worked in the same territory for the previous, going on 15 years and has been there, without 10 years without leaving. And then multiple times there before that, the previous 10 years through multiple bookers, they're going to think this guy's in with the office. And yes, he's going to be thought of as a stooge. And there's a real good reason in most cases why people that have been in that situation are thought of that way. So is it the chicken or the egg? We don't know.
All right. Well, our next question, Jim, sent into CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from Mike in Florida. When Nikita Koloff returned to the NWA in 1988 with a full set of hair, his run was awful.
A full set of hair?
That's what it says here, a full set of hair. His run was awful. Why? Do you think it was the hair? Why did he grow his hair? And if he was told to grow his hair, I hope that person was fired. Your thoughts?
My first year in the business, I can't remember. It was Frank Morrell or somebody was giving me some advice about something, and Dundee came around the corner and said, "Fuck Frank, don't smarten him up. You'll kill his gimmick." And I think the problem was Nikita got smart. He had taken time off there because I can't remember the timeline of the whole thing, but he had gotten married, but his wife was sick and she was a young person, and he had taken some time out of the business. And then I think he came back and there was a period of time where he was hurt for a little while also. So I can't remember which coming and going, but when they brought Nikita into the Carolinas, he became Nikita Koloff. He was that fucking monster from Minnesota, but he suddenly became in his mind a fucking Russian. He didn't speak, even on the plane, even on Crockett's plane, when just the boys were on the plane, he used the accent to the point where Arn one night said, "Cue ball, it's just us boys. We know you're Scotty Simpson from Minnesota," right?
He just did an interview where he said the entire time he was out in Los Angeles auditioning for Rocky IV, he kept the accent going. No one on the set, Stallone, no one heard his real voice.
But he did that. He was 300 and something pounds. He was jacked up. All he did when he first and Cat Collins was one of his roommates. I think Don Kernodle was not. But anyway, he moved to Charlotte. He's this bald-headed, supposedly Russian, 300-something pound guy that's never been in the fucking business before, barely knows how to fucking work, but they're smashing him over. He didn't even cash his checks for almost a year when he first came in, because he was used to just, okay, I'm going to train, I'm going to go to the gym, I'm going to eat clean, I'm going to go wrestle, right? I'm going to make money. He was getting a draw for his road expenses, wouldn't cash his fucking checks. They had to call him from the office and say, fuck, you got fucking $100,000 worth of fucking checks. Cash them. We're going to cancel them.
See, I got to stop you there. I had a listener of the Superpodcast get in touch with me a while back, and we read the letter on the air. His mom worked at the bank, and she said Nikita went in there to open up a checking account, and it was, it's so bad. Like the whole time it was the voice of the bank, too.
Yes, everywhere. And they drew nothing but money with him. And go back and look, he's the shits. He's a classic muscle guy. And I'm not knocking him because it's, fuck, he'd never done it before, right? But they had that run, that hot run where he looked like Nikita and was Nikita, and then all of a sudden, when he started cashing the checks, then I think maybe it's when he met his wife. I don't know. But then he all of a sudden bought a new wardrobe, and he was wearing suits and stylish jackets, and fucking Arn renamed him GQ Ball because he looked like he stepped off the fucking cover of GQ magazine. And we're like, what the fuck? He's spending money. And he, as he got to be a better worker and got smart, and then he got off the sauce for a while, probably about, when his wife was ill or whatever, but things changed in his life. He started learning to work. He started learning the business was a work. He started enjoying making the money, and he lost being Nikita Koloff. And for a couple of years, he was Nikita, but it wasn't the presence of this fucking guy that you figured was going to fucking go off and murder you at any point. And the real Russian, I don't know. We smartened him up and killed his gimmick.
And he was half the size too. I mean, that was.
And then he lost the size, and then it's much healthier for him not to be doing all that stuff and to be that size. But he was first couple of years he was ready to snap. Fuck, I was hosting an interview they were doing one time, the Russians, and Nikita was going to talk last, and they're overtime, and the guy's screaming in my fucking IFB in my ear, pitch to break, or pitch to the ring, or pitch wherever we're pitching, right? And Nikita takes a dramatic pause, this is the chance. I didn't know he was done yet because he had that fucking accent. I couldn't understand half what the fuck he was saying anyway. And I go, let's go to the ring. And he turned and looked at me, and he came up in the locker room. I should have knocked you out. I'm like, because I pitched to the fucking ring? I wasn't finished. I don't want to say the words roid rage, but he was not happy. It wasn't a pleased man. But he was, yes. But it made Nikita Koloff that's the big money they drew with him was the first fucking, 3 years. Yeah. I mean, my God, and here's the thing about Dusty, now that I'm thinking about it. Dusty takes Nikita Koloff and makes him a monster fucking Russian heel and puts him against Ric Flair in Charlotte in 1985, and they draw almost 30,000 people to the fucking Memorial Stadium. Nikita Koloff hadn't been in the business a fucking year yet. And then a year later, he makes Big Bubba Rogers a monster heel and fucking goes around the country with Bubba, who hadn't fucking been in the business 8 months at that point, or 10 months then. And in Pittsburgh, I think he had been in the business 10 months, and they sold out to Pittsburgh Civic Arena, 16,600 people. Dusty could build fucking monster heels to go up against a babyface they cared about with a story behind it. But those monster heels had to be special because they had to really believe they were who they were. Nikita did. And Bubba, once we told him who he was, he became that person instantly. He bought it hook, line, and sinker, and he became that person. And he was selling out when he was a rookie.
Problem is, Dusty couldn't make any monster baby faces after a while.
Well, it's harder to make a monster baby face.
Flair. I mean, that was the thing. If you have all these monster heels, you turn Flair babyface. The fans weren't going to boo him anyway. But Flair didn't want to be heel. Or didn't want to be babyface, I should say.
Flair avoided that like fucking AIDS-infected hypodermic needles.
Well, speaking of which, let's go to our next question here, Jim. Sent in to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from Drew Carrig. I am sure Jim has done commentary for.
That's the comedian, the guy that has the TV show, Drew Carey?
No, that's Drew Carey. He's a WWE Hall of Famer. You should know this.
I forgot.
Yes, he's in a celebrity wing, wherever that wing may be. But I am sure Jim has done commentary for Smoky Mountain while also being the booker. I was watching AAA Triple Mania recently, and Vampiro was on commentary, and his reactions really got me thinking because Vamp, as far as I know, was the booker of AAA. Has Jim, while being on commentary as booker, seen something so ridiculous he stopped being commentator and became a disgruntled booker? Vampiro during commentary made a lot of comments a booker or someone in the gorilla position would say, but never on commentary. It is hilarious, but it also got me thinking about if Jim ever had a situation similar where just as the booker, he loses it while doing commentary.
Well, first of all, I never did commentary for Smoky Mountain Wrestling except show number 1 or 2, because Dutch did one and I did the other one just so we'd have different voices because those were our pilots, and I never did commentary again. Maybe I go out to the desk during a match, right? But I couldn't. I had to be in the locker room and had to be in the ring and etc. It was too much me. But in Ohio Valley Wrestling, oh yes. But still, let me say this, never anything like because you sent me the link to that just 15 minutes of, what was wrong with this Triple Mania fucking show. That was Triple Mania, right?
Yes, that was.
What a they should all be so embarrassed. Whoever owns that company should fire everybody that was involved in that program and start over from fucking scratch. I've never seen anything as unprofessional as that fucking idiot Vampiro. It was a goddamn clusterfuck in and out of the ring, but that was inexcusable on his part. If he's still working with those people, he's got a picture of the owner with a fucking goat. So no, you never do that. But what I would do in OVW was, and part of it was the nature of the program was people knew that it was a wrestling school / local promotion. So we presented people who were very green and inexperienced up and coming young wrestlers. But I would attempt to make sense out of stupid things that in some cases happened. I would attempt to make logical sense out of it. And if I had to say that apparently that particular talent is just a fucking idiot, then sometimes I would say that. But never anything to the point where I just started cutting promos on them and exposed the business, which is what that fucking moron was doing. But at that clusterfuck level of a show, I mean, their audio was off, their video was off, their fucking wrestling was off. It was just a fucking train wreck clown show, outlaw mud show, to begin with. But then there's this fucker on. I couldn't understand that. Why would you, unless that was his notice, unless he was saying this fucked up company, I'm never going to work for these people again. Then he just, exposed business, made an ass out of himself, but at least they're, for some purpose. But if you intended to continue on with that company and you're burying it on the air, you're a fucking moron. But apparently that's what he is, pretty much a fucking moron. There
was a very brief moment there, where I actually felt bad for Matt Stryker. And I actually said, maybe he's not a bad guy. And then that moment went away.
I've worked with Matt Stryker a couple of times, and he's actually very easy to work with and to announce with. And I don't know, I'm sure he regretted what the fuck he was doing sitting there.
Yeah.
But good Lord, it shouldn't have been anywhere near that big of a fucking problem.
Well, let's get a couple more questions here on the show before we wrap things up. Jim, this next one was sent in on Twitter using the hashtag CornyDriveThru from Chris Edwards. I can't recall another manager who wore prescription glasses. Was this ever a problem for you in matches, and did you ever lose them?
No, because I was very judicious. If people, it's hard to explain now for people who are just used to everything being television, but I wore the glasses on TV on non-competitive matches and promos because that way I could see, because I've always been nearsighted. In the promos, obviously, you can wear glasses. In the non-competitive matches, I was being cocky. I'm not involved, blah, blah, blah. And these guys, the Mulkey brothers or whoever, are not going to give my guys any trouble. So there's no reason for me to even take my glasses off type of thing. But on house shows, I would always go to the ring with no glasses on because generally I was going to get involved, get bumped, have more of a problem, both as a shoot and a work. You know, if you go into a fight with the Rock and Roll Express, you don't even take your fucking glasses off. Yeah. So I kind of, that was the logic, but that's why in a lot of cases, when I was in big arenas, I never really got to enjoy seeing the fucking crowd from the ring, because in the Superdome, I could only see to the fucking fifth row ringside, maybe. And then it just kind of started blurring from there.
Anyone else you could think of who had similar problems?
Well, God, you know, there's
as a manager.
plenty. Oh, as a manager, I'm trying to think. Well, I mean, I was going to say Stan Hansen's blind as a bat, right? And he can't wear his fucking glasses, but which is probably why the Lariat is fearsome and got its feared reputation as much as anything else. But I'm trying to think. I don't know. But, and every once in a while we do an angle. I remember one time Dusty said, "Bring extra glasses, kid." And he trapped me in the corner of the ring when I didn't expect it and fucking broke my glasses and stomped on them and backhanded them and did all this stuff and everything. So we, you know, every once in a while we do angles, but I never lost any that I didn't want to lose or wasn't prepared to lose.
I don't know how you could answer this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway because I'm curious where you'll go with it. This was sent in on Twitter using the hashtag CornyDriveThru from L.E. Funt. Which wrestler has been the most over at the youngest age?
Ooh. Well, I mean, it depends on over as a babyface or over as a heel. Because Terry Gordy was at 18 and Michael Hayes was 19, right? When they were on top in Louisiana.
Yeah.
Or thereabouts. Tommy Rich was real young when he got hot in Atlanta.
I mean, Fez was what when he won the NWA title?
21.
21? All right.
I think he's 21. Because Rich, I think, was the youngest champion except for Fez the first time in 1937. Jody Hamilton main evented Madison Square Garden with his brother Larry when he was 19 years old back in the late 50s. And they were a hot team at the time, but he wasn't really just over.
Mark
Lewin was young. He was good. And I know I'm not thinking of somebody really fucking obvious. You had a lot
of young guys go through OVW. I know there was a while where people thought that Rene Dupree would, because he was so young when you had him, he would, have a great career. You had Randy Orton when he was really young. You had a lot of these guys when they were young, so you did get to see. Was there anyone that you thought would break out that didn't break out?
Jeter got Jeter when he was 19. That's the bad OVW guys getting bad gimmicks by comedy writers discussion that we had recently.
But beyond,
but also who I was about to say somebody and you scared it out of me because you made me go sideways. Fuck,
Masta Jr.?
No, oh fuck no. Wait, here's an edit point. No, but I've got to think of who the fuck I was about to say. I was going to ask how old was Dusty when he did the angle and flat? He'd been in business 6-7 years at that point.
Oh yeah.
Lawler in 74 was 22, and he was top 10 at that time, box office that year. There have been a lot of phenomenal, young guys that got the right push at the right time. Bobby Shane got over real quick. But, that's the thing is sometimes some people say, well, The Rock got over so quick, but he was 27 or 28 when he started.
Do you think it's possible even for a guy to, let's say someone came along, they were just a wrestling prodigy. Not only were they good in the ring, they understood psychology, they were great. They're 19 years old. Is there any chance for that person to even be able to be put in that position? Would they be able to handle not only the pressure of being there, but also, are the guys in the locker room going to like that if all of a sudden some new guy shows up and gets a push to the top?
Well, if he's drawing so much money that they're going to give him that push to the top, then everybody ought to want to be on his fucking card, and I think it depends on the person because, if it's some fucking jack-off 19-year-old that, doesn't know his ass from a hole in the wall, then yes, he's going to fuck up in all the, usual ways. But if it's a responsible, adult-minded 19-year-old, of which, I've seen a few of those too, then he ought to be able to handle it. But at the same time, I used to try to tell the WWF, don't take the Rene Duprees, don't take the fucking, the Randy Orton when he was still young, don't take the guys that are not even 21 yet and put them on the road for that reason, because let them, be able to vote legally and rent a car and all that bullshit. But if somebody just got so suddenly hot that you had to make that move, I can see doing it. And there has been, young prodigies in territories over time in different places. Strike while the iron is hot, but the guys ought to understand. And also who's going to be working with that guy, 2 or 3 of the other guys that might be jealous of him. So, everybody shares in it eventually. I've never understood being jealous of unless the one guy was the shits and wasn't drawing and wouldn't get off the top because he was related to the promoter or whatever, then yeah. But animosity toward a guy that's doing huge fucking business is not the proper placement for animosity.
What did you think about the animosity that was directed towards WCW guys after the purchase of WCW because of the contracts that they were given?
Well, once again, it's easy for the guys to get mad because they've been, and they have a legitimate reason to, because they've been there working for fucking, the company that won for all that time, and then other guys come in with more favorable treatment because of what they had or whatever the fuck. But it's not the fault of the person. It's the fault of the fucking companies, both of them. Once again, pick your spots. If they brought some dingbat Nitro girl in and gave her more money than they gave the guys tearing the fucking house down in the, middle of the card every night, yes, that fucking sucks. That's ridiculous. But at the same time, the companies let people get away with that shit. That's why I could see it from both sides, because I've been a talent, but I've also been a promoter. But you can't get over the egregious examples, the Sable type of deals. But if a guy if a guy came from WCW or from another company and had talent and was working hard, and he got a deal because, of the company he came from, it shouldn't be taken out on him. If it's some fucking asswipe that can't grab his fucking dick with both hands and he doesn't know what the fuck he's doing and he's getting in the way of shit and he's getting that much money, I can see him having some fucking heat.
Jim, our final question this week was sent in to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from Gary Clark. My favorite jobber and then turned trainer in WCW was Sergeant Buddy Lee Parker. Has Jim got any stories or memories of this man?
Yeah, him and who was his partner in the state patrol? Was it
Sergeant
Dale?
James? Yeah, Dale Vesey.
Dale Vesey.
Yeah.
And I'm
I've never heard you just at a loss for words like this.
Well, Dale Vesey was the experienced veteran of the team there. We had some matches with him, and they were very fun television matches. I never had any problem with Buddy Lee Parker, the Sarge as he came to be known, because of the state patrol gimmick, Sergeant Buddy Lee Parker, right? Apparently, Jody liked him, and they made him the head trainer at the power plant. And I've heard that he was wonderful with calisthenics. And since I don't dislike the guy, I hate to, but I have to be honest here with the folks. He was a good, solid, guy to use on TV or underneath on the card in a small town or, just a show or whatever. But it was not in any way, shape, or form somebody that I would have featured, much less pushed, much less asked to train guys that I was investing fucking hundreds of thousands of dollars in. And I don't know how that happened. Once again, I speak from experience here in OVW. We had guys that had wrestled all over the world. Rip Rogers, who had wrestled every style in every country and had been featured in territories for the previous fucking 15 years. And Danny Davis, who actually technically in the ring most ways was one of the smoothest and the best workers that I ever managed. And think how much of a list that takes in. And we had guest guys from the WWF coming in that had experience in various places and big companies and in featured positions. And meanwhile, WCW had the power plant with Sergeant Buddy Lee Parker. I never got it. I don't get it. I just don't. Except Jody Hamilton, who they had chosen in the office to run the training program, apparently liked him. But I don't know how that fucking happened.
It is bizarre, and it's a question that needs to be answered one day. But as we wrap things up...
But apparently not today, because I had no answer for it.
But not today, and with that, the drive-thru is closed.
Trying to sneak out on me, eh?
I am. It's a very tense thumb piano today. Of course, you guys know how it works. You can hear us on the Jim Cornette Experience Thanksgiving edition this week when it comes out, or you can listen to it anytime, wherever you want. Look for the Jim Cornette Experience when it debuts on Thursday. Of course, wherever you find your favorite podcast. You can follow Jim on Twitter at the Jim Cornette. You can follow me on Twitter at Great Brian Last. You can hear me on the 605 Superpodcast at 605pod.com, or available wherever it is that you find your favorite podcast. Get ready, the anniversary show coming up later this week with Mr. Jim Cornette. And on the topic of this Jim Cornette fellow, you can go to jimcornette.com and visit Cornette's Collectibles for Jim Cornette burger towels, which will be gone pretty soon. Jump on that now, as well as DVDs, autographed photos, books, action figures, restraining orders, and so much more. jimcornette.com. Of course, if there's someone you really have a problem with and they've done you wrong and you need to get revenge, well, maybe it's the wrong way to put it, but let's say you want to get even with someone who's done you wrong.
Hey, let me tell you something. If somebody has fucked you around and you want to get even with said someone, I know the guy to call.
Well, unfortunately, Cyanide Steve's not around, so you can call Stephen P. New. What's that number?
888-692-8084 with a smile.
That's right. And with that, the drive-thru has closed. We will see you on Thursday for Jim Cornette. I'm the Great Brian Last. Tally-ho!
He's a fine fellow. He really is.